Today's review is of the ebuyer AlphaSync pre-built gaming PC, a name that is literally true. Packed inside the Corsair Frame 4000D case. We previously reviewed it and we liked it. We have an AMD Ryzen 7 9800X 3D processor. In our review we loved this processor, and that's cooled by a Corsair Nautilus 240RS AIO cooler. Graphics are supplied by an AMD Radeon RX 9070 XT. In this instance it's a Sapphire Pulse. We haven't reviewed this specific graphics card, but we're familiar with its type. The SSD is a Gen 4 WD Black SN850X 2TB, and the power supply is a Corsair RME 850W Gold. So we have a bunch of components we've previously reviewed, plus one or two others we're not familiar with. So let's see what we make of this AlphaSync PC. In my introduction there I gave you a whistle-stop tour of the hardware that makes up this PC. The components are solid contenders when it comes to reviews. Those parts that we have reviewed, we haven't quite reviewed them all. In total, if you bought these parts at retail, it set you back £1,800 including VAT here in the UK. You also need a copy of Windows, you've got to put the thing together, and you need a warranty. So the price of £2,200 including VAT is fairly reasonable, and we all know about the difficulty of the availability of graphics cards at the moment. Of course, pricing outside the UK doesn't apply to a system that is from a UK PC builder, and given the current turmoil in international pricing over the pond in America, I'm rather glad that this is pretty much a UK specific product. The motherboard is a part I did not mention in my introduction. It's an Asus Prime B650M-A Wi-Fi 2, and it's a fairly basic piece of hardware. B650 chipset, micro ATX, so you're a little bit limited on expansion, but that's realistically not like to be a problem for most people. But in terms of ports and connectors, it's a bit on the light side. Let me just turn the PC around and show you the rear I/O panel. You will note we have no USB-Cs on the rear I/O whatsoever. We have a VGA graphics output next to the DisplayPort and the HDMI, and we have a legacy PS2 port. PS2 can be functional on a super duper high-end overclocking motherboard. In this instance it just looks old. I think this motherboard is a curious choice. The other thing you may have noticed in the intro is that the 2TB WD SSD doesn't have a heatsink. I consider that to be a shame, because WD makes the same models of SSD with heatsinks. Indeed, we reviewed this SSD with a heatsink, and they don't add a whole lot to the cost. That seems, again, like a little bit of a shame. It has to be said, ebuyer has put this AlphaSync PC together very neatly. Let me pull off some panels for you. Inside the main compartment, absolutely no grounds for complaint whatsoever. We look in the top, neat and tidy. We go around the back where the cables are. Looks as smart as anything. I'm very happy with the build quality, and when you combine that with the quality of the components, it's all looking very good. The build is absolutely fine, the hardware is pretty much fine. I'm going to take a quick look at whether or not the absent heatsink on the M.2 SSD is an issue or otherwise in just a moment, but first let's discuss software. We have a lot of RGB going on, we have absolutely minimal RGB control, which might be a surprise to you. This is Corsair hardware, it's Corsair case, Corsair fans, Corsair liquid cooler, Corsair memory, and yet we have no Corsair iQ software. We do have some Asus software. You can see I have Armoury Crate installed. I installed that. Asus motherboards for I don't know how long. I've got a little prompt within the BIOS. You can switch it off if you choose. This motherboard has it enabled, which is the default. So you are asked, do you wish to install Armoury Crate once the system boots up? And I have. We also have AMD Radeon software installed exactly as you would expect. One thing we did not expect and that slightly confused me, this tight VNC. It is apparently it's a remote management software. System builders, it seems, use software, either this or something like it, when they're configuring their systems and to check everything's tickety-boo as the system goes through the build process. This software was not supposed to be on the PC when we received it. There was apparently some sort of issue to do with configuration or some such, which meant it arrived in a state that you were not supposed to receive it. The absence of Corsair IQ, and as a consequence this fixed rotating rainbow marquee on all those fans and on the memory and the cooler, struck me as a bit peculiar. And the fact I had to install Armoury Crate, it wasn't a big job, you just go yes and then it gets on with it. So I asked AlphaSync why the software wasn't installed. Was this what we would expect? And they said that they're unable to install or set up Armoury Crate or Corsair IQ as our production network is not internet enabled. This is because of restrictions around the Microsoft Digital Product Key Activation Service. At a certain level this makes sense. The idea is that there's no chance that malware can get onto your brand new PC. Which is obviously a good thing. On the other hand, the BIOS splash screen has the AlphaSync logo baked into it, and clearly the image that's on the SSD, that could include IQ if they chose, or Armoury Crate, or whatever other software. So to my mind, the fact that this software is not installed is a choice. Whether or not it's a good idea, that's a matter of opinion, but personally I think the idea of having all this RGB with absolutely zero control and not even a note to say if you want control of your RGB, install Corsair IQ, I think they're missing a trick there. And now let's take a look at whether or not the SSD minus its heatsink is an issue. Let's run Crystal Disk Mark and see what happens to the temperature of the SSD. And 3 runs of Crystal Disk Mark show the drive does not throttle. It's peaking at 85-86 Celsius, which is higher than I would personally like to see, but the speeds are absolutely fine. Consistently we have 7.3 gigabytes per second read, 6.6 gigabytes per second write, which is exactly what we expect for a Gen 4 SSD. No heatsink? Apparently no problem. Before we get into our charts for testing and performance, let's just open a game and see how the system behaves when a load is put into the cooling system. The cooling is essentially silent, the coil whine is quite audible. And there we have it. And now let's get into those testing charts. In Cinebench 2024 Multicore, in our review of the Ryzen 7 9800X 3D, it scored 1353 marks, and here the AlphaSync PC with the same processor scores 1350 points. It's the same story in Cinebench 2024 single core. In our processor review we got 134 points, and here the PC scores 133 points. And in Geekbench 6 multi-core you can see the PC again matches our processor review. Aida 64 memory bandwidth. There is a small surprise here. The Corsair Vengeance DDR5 6000 memory does very well. Both the read speed and the write speed are higher than we'd expect for regular DDR5 6000 on this processor. And then we move on to gaming, and every test system in this chart has an RTX 4090 graphics card, with the exception of the AlphaSync running on an RX 9070 XT. Far Cry 6 at 1080p on Ultra preset, and the results are pretty good. 249 FPS on average. It's clear the Ryzen 7 9800X 3D is carrying the AlphaSync PC along, and the graphics card does a perfectly decent job. Far Cry 6 at 1440p still on Ultra, and we see the AlphaSync drops down the charts by a few places. In essence, that graphics card is costing us 25 FPS on average, however 207 FPS is still perfectly decent. Assassin's Creed Mirage at 1080p on Ultra High preset, The AlphaSync is in the middle of the chart at 180 FPS on average, while the straight Ryzen 7 9800X 3D with RTX 4090 is at 203 FPS. Again, the graphics card's costing about 25 FPS compared to an RTX 4090. And Assassin's Creed Mirage at 1440p, again the differential's around 25 FPS. In this instance, however, that takes the AlphaSync PC straight to the bottom of the chart. But still, 151 FPS on average and a 1% low of 82 is eminently playable. In Cyberpunk 2077 at 1080p on Ultra preset, I've put the AlphaSync in second place. As you can see, based on the average FPS, it should be in third place. However, the 1% lows are very good. In fact, they're the highest of all the PCs in this group. No matter how you cut it, the AlphaSync has done well in this game. Cyberpunk 2077 at 1440p. Here we see a very peculiar result in my eyes, but this is the first time I've been working with the RX 9070 XT, and perhaps I should have been better prepared. At the very top of the chart we have the Ryzen 7 9800X 3D with RTX 4090 with an average of 241 FPS. Second from the bottom we have the AlphaSync PC, same processor, RX 9070 XT graphics card, and it's 90 FPS slower, but the average of 151 is clearly very playable. Total War Pharaoh at 1080p on Ultra preset. Again, the differential between the Ryzen 7 9800X 3D at the top of the chart and the AlphaSync in the middle of the chart is significant, 105 FPS on average. But I think we can agree an average of 230 FPS is absolutely fine for gaming. And we finish with Total War Pharaoh at 1440p. The difference here between the Ryzen 7 9800X 3D at the top of the chart and the AlphaSync second from the bottom is huge, 160 FPS differential with the RX 9070 XT. While 135 FPS is a decent frame rate, the chart is not the least bit flattering.
With 20 years of PC manufacturing experience, Cyberpower PC are the best in the business. With the largest range of parts available in the UK, our team of experienced builders will expertly build and test each system to be delivered to you the very next day. Check out cyberpowersystem.co.uk.
It's time for my conclusion, and you will note that I have configured Asus Armoury Crate and I've also installed Corsair iCUE, and we now have RGB that is fully functional on all the cooling and also on the memory, and I have to say it looks rather good. Let's sum up my pros and cons for the AlphaSync pre-built gaming PC, a name that I still can't quite come to love. Pros, the good points: good gaming performance. That's despite the fact that this PC suffered in some of our charts. That's because the graphics are, relatively speaking, budget. Let's cut the difference and call it mid-range, because these days graphics can be monumentally expensive. The combination of decent graphics and a very good gaming processor gives you good results. Secondly, the build quality is very good. There is literally nothing about the build that I dislike or am the least bit unhappy about. Third, you've got plenty of SSD storage included. It's a 2TB M.2, adding SATA storage would be easy peasy, and you do have the option of adding more M.2 if you like. And third, the pricing is fair. I'm saying fair rather than very fair, but again I have no argument in that department. Cons, the negative points. There are no rear USB-C ports on the motherboard and a single port at the front, which obviously is connected to the case. If you want more than one USB-C, this PC will be a problem for you. I cannot remember seeing a motherboard that doesn't have rear USB-Cs in the past, I don't know how many years. I consider it almost extraordinary and a sign of cost cutting that's gone too far. Secondly, my other con is that Armoury Crate and iCUE are not installed, and therefore the RGB lighting was fixed as you first saw. But that in turn is easily fixed. Overall, what score shall I give this? I'm going to go with a worth considering. I'm going with 7.5 out of 10. Remember, we're at kitguru.net on the web, and also we're on TikTok.